Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. A big welcome to all of you. My name is Laura and I'm delighted that you are joining us for today's ESPC community webinar. Today I am joined by Garry Trinder from Microsoft, who will talk to you guys about building resilient apps with Microsoft 365 Developer Proxy. We love hearing what you guys have to say, so remember to join in on the conversation about today's webinar and more on X. Our Twitter handle is at ESPC_community and our hashtag is hashtag ESPC23. Tweet us, at us, and tell us what you learned. Don't forget to check out our Resource Centre, which is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. You can access and view the Resource Centre by visiting our website, sharepointeurope.com, and clicking the Content tab at the top. Don't let the learning stop here. Continue to keep up and stay ahead by joining us for our next webinar, Microsoft Fabric, the Future of Data Analytics, with Martha Mongan. This webinar takes place on Tuesday, October 17th from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. CEST. For more information on this webinar, please check out sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. ESPC is fast approaching. If you are looking for a vibrant Microsoft 365 and Azure conference that is jam-packed with groundbreaking insights, visionary keynotes, hands-on workshops, and exciting networking opportunities, then it is time to secure your ESPC tickets. But why should you attend ESPC? You can receive valuable insights by attending a variety of session types across the biggest Microsoft 365 and Azure topics, catering from levels 100 to 400. Hear from Microsoft product team members, regional directors, MVPs, MCMs, and independent experts. ESPC is a great way to build your professional network and meet like-minded people from across the globe. Share and receive advice from fellow attendees, but also from our very friendly and helpful speakers. ESPC also helps you to keep up and get ahead with the latest product developments and practices that matter the most. Find new and better ways of working to bring new energy and effectiveness to your work. And you can also expect the latest news straight from Ignite. So invest in your team, invest in yourself, and invest in your career by learning new skills or mastering current ones at ESPC. And book before October 31st to avail of our latest offer, which is our late bird offer. And as well, you can avail of our special team discounts. This is your last chance to save before tickets reach full price. Visit sharepointeurope.com/pricing to secure your tickets before it's too late. This year at ESPC, we are placing a special emphasis on recognizing and awarding those who have made a lasting impact on the Microsoft 365 community, the ones who drive innovation, collaboration, and positive change in the industry and beyond, those who inspire us to learn, grow, and achieve more. It's not often that we get to show our appreciation and recognition for these amazing people and to celebrate their achievements and contributions. But the ESPC Inspire Awards allow you to do just that. So how can you get involved? Nominating someone for the ESPC Inspire Awards is easy and simple. All you need to do is visit sharepointeurope.com/ESPC Inspire Awards and fill out the quick nomination form with your details and the details of the person or persons that you are nominating. Submit your nominations before the deadline of October 10th, and you will be entered into a draw to win an Amazon voucher. So after the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any question you might have into the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will also be recorded and added to the Resource Centre, where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to today's webinar presenter, Garry. Hello, Garry.
Hello, Laura. Hopefully you should be able to hear me and hopefully see me.
Yeah, all good.
Perfect. And let's show my screen. And hopefully you should be able to see presentation.
Yeah, we can see that.
Perfect. Right. Okay. Let's take it away then. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining today. Yeah, throughout this webinar, if you do have any questions, please just drop them in the chat as we're going along as well. I'll do my best to, if I can spy some questions that I can reply to as I'm going, I'll do that. Otherwise, we'll have a bit of a Q&A session at the end. But let's start with a typical scenario, right? You've built an app, yeah? You've deployed it, it's ready to run in production. Launch day is coming up. Everyone's kind of excited. Marketing have got involved. It's a big thing, right? Everyone logs on at that first day, and then something goes wrong. A cloud API that your application needs to run fails. And users start losing their work, and potentially the business can start losing money because of these issues as well. And this launch has quickly turned into a disaster, really. So the question is, could this have been avoided? And today's session is going to be talking about how you can use Microsoft 365 Developer Proxy to build resilient apps. So my name is Garry Trinder. I work for Microsoft. I'm a senior cloud developer advocate, and I'm focused on Microsoft 365. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter, on GitHub. Just use the @Garry Trinder handle, and you'll pretty much find me on whatever platform you are using. So to just kind of give you an idea of what we're going to cover today, so this session is relevant if you're a developer, if you're a tester, even if you're an administrator as well. We're going to quickly kind of cover what we mean by a resilient app, and then touch on why building resilient apps is hard, and how the Microsoft 365 Developer Proxy can help make your life easier and avoid some of those issues that we talked about right at the beginning in that initial scenario. And then I'm going to show you how to get started. So I'm going to have a big demo section where I'll cover how you can go from downloading the proxy on your machine to covering a few of the features. Not all of the features. There are plenty of features in the proxy, but the features that are relevant to resilient apps. So let's start with, what do we mean by a resilient app? So an app is resilient if it continues to carry out its mission in the face of adversity. And a great way of thinking about this is a slogan from an old Timex commercial. This is like in the 50s, where Timex was kind of like very much on resilience and robustness, and that you could throw anything at their watches, and their slogan was, it can take a licking and keep on ticking. It would just keep going no matter what you threw at it. That watch would still function, perform as it needed to. So that's what we're talking about with resilient apps, apps that are just gonna keep on going. There's a very good article that I refer you to by Donald Firesmith that goes through what we actually mean by resilience in system aspects as well as application aspects as well. So if you want to kind of jump into that in a very much more detail than what I'm covering here today, it's a really good read. It's actually a big series, so worthwhile just checking out, just to kind of increase your own knowledge on this area as well. So let's talk about resilience. So when we're talking about resilience, we're assuming that these adverse conditions will occur. We are making sure that we are testing for all the conditions which don't happen on your developer tenant, right? When you're in your development tenant, you're in a tenant of one, you've got no noisy neighbors. Every request that you push through to an API, let's say, you're building on Microsoft 365, you're sending API requests to SharePoint Online and Microsoft Graph. Those requests are going to succeed. You're not really going to get many issues through usage by users, using your application in maybe ways that you didn't intend. But one of the things that to point out is that resilience is not really just a tick box. You don't just go, yes, my app is resilient. It's not a yes, no. It's kind of a degree of resilience. And resilience is made up of a number of aspects. So things like availability, capacity, interoperability, performance, reliability, robustness, safety, security, and reusability. And all of them together kind of make up how resilient your app is. Now, as we're building apps in the cloud, we're using other services, so we're generally calling APIs. We don't have to necessarily worry about things like availability and capacity, because they're handled by the organizations that are running these services. But there are things that we should factor into to the applications that we're building. Things like performance. Are we using these APIs in the most efficient ways? How does our app stand up to potential errors that those APIs could throw? Things like throttling as well. Some behaviors that these APIs exert that you as a user of that API need to handle and react to. And also security as well. How are you handling the security when it comes to permissions in your requests? Are you're obtaining too many permissions for your application, and what's actually needed for your application to run? So availability and reliability by themselves are just, they're not sufficient. You need to think wider than just a few of these elements. So let's go back to cloud APIs. Now, the reality is that cloud APIs are going to fail, right? It's not a matter of if, it's when. So a few questions for you. When a cloud API fails, how do you know what's going to happen to your app when they do? Do you know beforehand, or do you just wait for it to happen? That there's a failure and you just, you see a support ticket and you go and fix it. Do you know if your app will recover from certain errors? I talked about throttling. Throttling is something that can happen for a momentary period of time. It's not permanent. How do you know that if throttling happens, that your app is going to continue maybe in the background? Things might slow down, your app might retry on behalf of a user, or do you just throw an error and people have to retry? And how do you actually test for these failures? How do you actually, as you're developing your app, kind of have these behaviors shown that you can tackle them at development time, rather than just releasing them and let your end users find these issues to which then you have to fix? Going back to that initial scenario, if you let your users find out these issues, then that could have a lot of impact. It could be people losing trust in the application. It could be an issue from a brand point of view. Say if you're an ISV and you've built an application that people are buying and it's not working under these conditions, then that can have an impact as well. So thinking about how you actually test for these failures is actually quite difficult as well. And the reality is, testing cloud APIs is hard, right? We've gone from an age of being able to spin up a server, a local server, have a local API that you can just kind of change, go onto the server, change settings, turn behaviors on and off. You can't come to Microsoft and say, hey, can you just turn on throttling for 5 minutes on my tenant just while I test it? It doesn't work like that. And it's hard to get started as well. It's kind of like, how do you test these things? Do you start writing unit tests? How do you actually test these issues like throttling, which again, they can happen at any moment. And one thing as an old school consultant as well is, nobody pays for testing. It's always the last thing. No one wants to do it. It's always, we need to get features in, and yes, it runs and we can see it and we've tested it, we've kicked the tires a little bit, we've seen it running in the developer tenant, but you're only testing the happy path, really. And that can be a big factor in it as well. It's time to set up tests, going through the difficulties of actually working out how to test them, and also having the cash to be able to go, yeah, we're going to throw some time at actually testing these applications. And then the final thing is, not every API is the same, right? Every API is different. We have lots of specifications and standards. Does every API out there adhere to those standards? No, they don't. And as you start to use different APIs, you start to see these kind of subtle differences, which makes it even more difficult to really test these areas. You know, in some cases, like Microsoft Graph, you get a 429 back for throttling. Some other APIs don't return a 429, they return a 403. And then other APIs take it to the next level and go, hey, there's not just one type of 429, we've got several, we've got three that you could, you know, dependent on the issue that's raised, you might want to do different things. So it gets really, really difficult. So this is where Microsoft 365 Developer Proxy comes into it. So this is a tool that's going to help you build resilient apps on Microsoft 365, and it's going to cover those three areas to improve robustness, performance, and security. And it's going to enable you to test the untestable. Another good thing about it is you can run the proxy and test against any app. So that is any platform, any tech stack, any language, because we look at the network requests. We don't look at your code. We look at the requests going over the wire and then test different scenarios. So we get the proxy to inject behaviors into your application through the network layer. So you don't even have to change your code either. Now, the Developer Proxy supports any HTTP API. So we have presets and defaults for Microsoft Graph and SharePoint Online. But say, for example, you've written your own API and you want to use proxy with it, the proxy will support that. Say you're using Open API is a great example at the moment. Everyone wants to get into AI. There's lots of usage of that, but it can get quite costly. You want to throw errors as well and check that things are working correctly. You know, you could use the Developer Proxy to you know, throw errors, have behaviors like throttling and rate limit as well, and have those show up. And it's low investment. It's really easy to get up and running. Like I said, there's no code changes involved. There's no real tedious setup. I'll go through the actual setup with you and just show how you can use the proxy easily. After this, hopefully you'll be able to go away and try it yourself. So let's take a look at how the proxy is going to improve robustness. And robustness is this ability to withstand or overcome adverse conditions. So we're back to the issues occurring with cloud APIs. And what's great is this is going to reveal the issues to you before they actually affect your users. So you're getting ahead of potential issues that might happen on that launch day, like what we saw in the first scenario. So there's three ways in which the proxy can help you with robustness. We have the ability to just throw random errors. So we have a collection of error codes, and we can set the failure rate. So maybe we want 50% of the requests that are sent from our application to fail, and it will pick a random HTTP status code. You can configure that to be actually just one status code if you want, which in the scenario of throttling is something that we can actually enable by using the proxy. Proxy gives you this kind of on button now for throttling behaviors that you can turn on and test your application with. So things like the retry headers. The proxy will return a 429, it'll inject a retry header that then you as a developer can write the code to go, okay, yeah, I need to step back a little bit before I send my next request. But this is then enabling your application to be more robust, because if an issue does occur, you can retry on behalf of the user. You don't have to throw an error back to them, and your app can still continue working even though there might be some errors being thrown in the background. And finally, there's rate limiting as well. So rate limiting is kind of like the next level of throttling. So with rate limiting, this is where you have a number of requests that you can send in a given time period, and when you exceed that time period, you then start to get throttled. So with rate limits, you want to make sure that you're staying in within the limits of the API, so you're not exceeding the quota which the API is giving you. We've all seen it recently with X.com, Twitter, with the rate limiting issues that a lot of people saw. That's the kind of issue that we're talking about, is being able to use the proxy to replicate those scenarios. Improving performance, so ability to respond efficiently to user requests whilst using the minimum amount of resources as well. So there's two features that we have, and this is specific to Microsoft Graph. Well, the first one is actually specific to Graph, is using $select. So $select is a really easy way to make sure that the request that you're sending to an API is only returning the data that you need. That means that your request is going to be faster, there's less resources being used in the background as well, and Proxy can help detect those requests that don't use $select and highlight them up so that then you can go in and correct them. The other feature that we have is caching guidance. So this is where you're sending the same request but in a short period of time. So let's say if you're sending the same request within a 5-second period, that might be a good candidate to then actually cache that data. So you're not going back to the API every single time to get that data. Chances are it might not have changed. So cache it locally and then get the data later. So caching guidance is something that's really useful from a performance perspective, to just see where can we get performance improvements. Maybe it's an app that you've already got and you've already built and you think it's running a little bit slow. Can we use the proxy to highlight those for us? And finally, about improving security as well. And this is kind of making sure that you're ensuring the principle of least privilege, that you're only using the permissions that you need for your app to function. So we've got two features. So we've got the ability to detect minimum required permissions. So this is, let's say you turn the proxy on, you run your app. Proxy is going to detect the requests that are being sent from your application. It's going to give you a list from Microsoft Graph of the minimal the minimal scopes that you need. Which is great for cross-referencing against, maybe your application registration, where you've got your list of your permissions that you might go, actually, we no longer need this really, group read write all. Actually, we only need this much less privileged permission now, and we can change that. And this is the second feature that we've got, is detecting over-consented applications, which this is actually viewing the token that goes over the wire and the request that you're sending. So we kind of take a peek at the access token and view the scopes that are actually being sent for the requests that are actually being made for your application, and saying, you don't need these. You've got way too many permissions for what you actually need. You should go in and you should remove them, because again, it's making sure that you've only got permissions for your app that it actually needs to function. So with that, it's time to get into the demo. So first of all, we're going to look at how to install the proxy. So for that, we can go to aka.ms m365/proxy, which gets you to the main repo for the M365 Developer Proxy. So in here we have our wiki, which is where our documentation is. So if you go into the wiki, you can see there's tons of pages in here covering all aspects of how to use the proxy. And we've got a getting started tutorial as well. So if you're on getting started, the first step is installation. So from here, you can download the latest release of the proxy. So let's go to that now. And here we have the latest version, which was actually just released earlier today, was 0.12.1. And we have the packages, download packages for Windows, for Mac OS, and for Linux as well. So we do support other operating systems. I'm just going to show you Windows today, but just choose the x64 zip, download that onto your machine, and then unzip the contents into a folder on your machine, which I've already done. So here's the contents of the zip file. Here we've got the M365 proxy executable, which will run on our machine to inject errors, behaviors into our apps. Okay, so one other thing which I did is I also added the path to the proxy into my environment variables. So if we go into here, I've just put it in my user profile directory. It was a nice, easy place to put it. That's not mandatory. If you want to put it on your C drive, any other drive that you want, you can do that. But it's a good idea to add the path in there so you can access the proxy from any folder that you're potentially working. So just OK that, and let's go to terminal. And the way that I can run the proxy, or we can see the details of the proxy, let's just run this. So you use M365 proxy, and then there's options available to change some of the runtime configurations. But if I do the oh no, it's not dash there, it's the full version. There we are. So you can see I've already got that installed and it's ready and available. In fact, I'm just going to jump into the proxy folder. Yeah, I'll just clear that off there. Okay, so that's now available and ready to use. So one of the things that we're going to do and test first and show you is just random errors. Okay, so what we're going to do is invoke a request using PowerShell. Just something out there. So that is just a request that's going to Microsoft Graph. It's going to return my profile information. Now that's going to fail anyway because I've not got an access token, but we want it to fail anyway. But I just want to show you how proxy intercepts the request and then injects kind of a random error into that. So I'm just going to start the proxy with all the default settings. So M365 proxy, that's now running. Now, the very first time that you actually run the proxy, you'll have a pop-up box, which will be asking you to install a certificate on your machine. And that's just needed for the proxy to inspect the traffic on your machine. So the way that the proxy works is that it sets itself up as a system-wide proxy on your machine. So any requests that are being made on your machine will go through the proxy. If the proxy detects a request that's on a URL that it knows about, then it will intercept that and then inject behaviors. So things will still keep running in the background, but it's just worthwhile knowing that is actually happening. There is a way of being able to define the proxy just to a specific process as well, which is documented in the wiki. So let's say, for example, you just want a single web browser. You can get the process ID of that web browser, and it'll only inspect or intercept traffic from that particular process. So check out the docs if that's something that you want to learn more about. So at this point, the proxy is running. I can just send my request. Let me open this up over here so we can see how it's going to run. Oops. Let's try that one again. Let's run that again. Come on. Oh. It did set it up as a local address. Let's have a look here. Apologies for this. Let me go back to our getting started tutorial, and I'm just going to get another request. There we go. Get started. So in here we have our request, where are we? There we are, PowerShell. There we go. I didn't add the proxy in. There we go. Apologies for that one little option that I missed. So we can see that the request has gone through the proxy, and we've got a number of warnings in here and guidance, but this has actually been passed through. So what's happened is when I've started the proxy, it's loaded up some default configurations, and that default configuration is stored in a file called the M365 proxy RC JSON file. Now this has a number of settings in here. What we use in the proxy is a number of plugins to add in different behaviors, and you can enable these and disable them as you need. The graph random error plugin, so this is the one that is enabled. So this is the one that's actually going to inject errors into the request, and it has a config section, which most of these plugins have. And in here we can see here's the array of errors or error codes that can be responded to, and also we have a failure rate which is set at 50%. So you know, there's a 50% chance that that single request could have failed, and we can increase that at runtime as well. So we can do that this way, or I could just retry the request and just see if we get lucky. Yeah, we got lucky. So we can see that the chaos label has shown that proxy's detected the request. It's gone, yes, this is one that I need to send an error back to, and it's decided it's going to send a 429 too many requests back. And that is how the random errors works. You can change the way that that works by setting the failure rate and the different allowed errors as well. So say we just want to have the 429 scenario as well. Then that's something that we can just test. If we want everything to fail, we just set it to 100. If we don't want anything to fail, then we can just set it to 0, and then the actual errors doesn't actually matter anymore. Now, this is a really simple example because I'm just sending a web request from my machine. But like I mentioned, you can use the proxy with any tech stack, with actually any web application. So I'm going to show you that by using the Graph Explorer. So let's quickly open the Graph Explorer up. And I should already be signed in. So I have my profile information here. Let me just move these windows around. There, over here, and let's just start the proxy from here. So this time I'm going to set it up with failure rate of 70%, and we're only going to test throttling in this scenario as well. So what's going to happen is we're going to see how the proxy injects throttling errors, how it injects the retry header as well, so that the code that's running in Graph Explorer goes, oh, I can retry. So we could recreate this this throttling scenario and then verify that our application actually works fine. So let's run that. Oh, there is one thing, an important thing which I did miss. This here, where it says press Control-C to stop the Microsoft 365 Developer Proxy, is important. You have to use Control-C. If you don't use Control-C, it doesn't unregister the proxy. So even though the proxy is not running, there's still a registration in the background, which could give you some odd kind of behaviors. And that's generally happens when you just close the terminal window down and think that everything's all okay. Just remember to do Control-C. If you forget to do that, just start the proxy again and do Control-C, and it will just unregister itself as well. So just make sure that you do that. Anyway, back to throttling. So we've got the proxy running. So now if I run a query to get the profile details in Graph Explorer, we can see that the proxy has intercepted the request made by proxy and sent the 429 back. The second request has been made, it's sent the 429 back. So it's still going. Third request, 429. Let's see if we get a whole 5 here or if it succeeds. Oh, there we go. So we can see how now the proxy can demonstrate the behavior of throttling just with that single request. There's actually another request there that's been made to my OneDrive that it's just picked up, but just ignore that one for a second. But we can see that it failed with a 429, it then retried, it retried afterwards, and the proxy was just going, no, I'm not ready yet, I'm not ready yet, I'm not ready yet. And these are configurable, so you can set the amount of times that you are expecting throttling to happen, test and verify that your application is actually handling these scenarios. We don't just want to throw an error to your end user just because there's a 429. It's something that we can actually recover from as application developers. So that's how we can do throttling. And again, showing how proxy can just be used with any web app. I've just gone to Graph Explorer, just opened it up in my browser. I don't have any code running on my machine. It just works. So from a testing perspective, that's really good. So as a tester, you could just run the proxy on your machine, go to your test environment and just click around and see what happens and see what things you can break with the proxy without having to get into what the actual code is. So the next kind of robustness check that we want to do is rate limiting. So rate limiting is something that's kind of special to Microsoft Graph and only to a few endpoints, but it's quite common, right? Rate limiting. I mentioned about x.com. There's OpenAI API at the moment that is being heavily used. They're only going to give you so many requests within a given time limit. If you exceed that, you're going to get throttling. So rate limiting is a common practice. And it's now in Microsoft Graph as well. So let's show a demo of how we can show the proxy work with rate limiting. I'm just going to clear this down and show an app that I already have running in the background. There we go. So I've got a web application which is sending a number of requests to Microsoft Graph, and it's going to show a graph, and it's going to show the number of requests they've sent over a duration of time. Now, these are the way that the rate limiting works is that you for every request you get information back from that API that tells you, how many units you've actually got left, when the reset will happen, so when you get the next kind of quota as well. And these are the things that you have to check as a developer. So one of the things that you might do is just go, hey, I'm just going to use fetch, right? Because what's wrong with fetch? I'm just going to send a request. I'm going to put a sleep on there, and it should be fine. Chances are, though, that's going to fail. That's at some point, the arbitrary time that you're giving it is not going to be sufficient. One way in which you can handle rate limiting, certainly Microsoft Graph as well, is to use the Microsoft Graph SDKs and use the rate limiting middleware. So there's a middleware that you can add to the SDK, which will handle this rate limiting scenario. So this will handle all the intricacies of, backing off, making sure that you send requests through in a kind of a more timely fashion rather than just throwing them all through in one go. Like, here's 100, see if you can deal with it. It might be like drips and drabs, like a dripping tap. Just constantly sending a message and get a request and getting a response back and knowing that it's just going to work and you keep in your quota. So let's just show how the proxy works with rate limiting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the proxy, but I'm going to start the proxy using a configuration file. So by default, we use the M365 proxy RC file, But you can just create your own config file and say, hey, I want to use this file instead that can have, a specific scenario that you want to test. So in the presets folder that you get with the download, we have a preset for the rate limiting for graph. So in here, we can see it's a much slimmed down version of this file, which I showed you before. And we have the retry after plugin, which injects the retry time. And we have this rate limiting plugin as well with some configuration settings like what is the cost per turn, what is the actual rate limit that we've got, and when should you retry after so many seconds. Okay, and also in this point here, which I didn't cover in the other file actually, is this is the list of URLs that the proxy is using to detect. So if it sees these requests going over the wire with these addresses, it will then invoke this behavior, the configurations that you've got set up. So in here, if you want to add any API, you just come into here and then just add your own entry as well. Again, that's fully documented. I'm not going to go into that today, but it's fully documented on the wiki if you're wanting to use the proxy outside of Graph. Okay, so just want to make sure I didn't make a change on there. And let's start the proxy here. Okay, so that is now running. I've got web server running in the background, which is running the code that we saw. So if I go to localhost 3002. Yeah, okay, so that has started. Okay. If I just go back to my index file. So let's just show what happens when we're just using fetch. So that's going to add the code in there. I'm just going to restart it. You can also clear the console by just pressing the C key, by the way, for when things get a little bit chaotic in the console. But this will start to. It's just doing backoffs at the moment, so you can see that things are being passed through the proxy. And they're coming through a pretty good rate actually. So this is just the delay that's been added in. See how long this is going to take. So I don't want to take this whole webinar up for this. Oh, there we go. So now everything's starting to fail, and you can see all of these, we've gone over the limit, and we've not got these retries to actually go and then get the request and then be successful. You can see that the successful request has just kind of stayed low, but there's still requests that are going out there. So that's what would happen with just using fetch. But if we switch to use the Microsoft Graph and the middleware, save that. Just clear it and restart this. This will now start to drip. So this will drip feed the request through to the graph until the graph returns a header that, after say like 80% of the rate limit has been, the quota has been reached, the Graph API will return you a value of here's how many requests you've got left. So the middleware can inspect that and then handle that scenario to make sure that it's slowing down as you're kind of getting towards that quota, so that your requests still keep carrying on. Now, Proxy is just sat here just making sure that those behaviors are being adhered to by your code. So it's a very useful thing. There's all the requests gone through. The quota probably just got renewed, so it just went, yeah, I can throw more through, and now it's going to go, hang on, I'm getting closer to my limit again, let's slow down. But it just keeps on going, and we don't get failures. And from a user perspective, that's great, because there's things happening in the background that we don't know about, we don't care about, we just want our application to work. And if we've got a little bit of slowness, that's not so bad. But we don't want failures. We don't want things to go bang and people lose their work. So that's how rate limiting works. So let's close that one down. Let's close that one down. And so now let's move on to improving performance. So let's start the proxy with I'll just copy this in actually, be quicker. With a failure rate of 0. Oops, missed a dash there. Use the short one. Oh, that wasn't good. Let's copy and paste that went wrong. Failure rate 0. Ah. Zero is not matched. Yes, it should be. Oh, apologies. Let's just go. Okay, that's better. Okay, so let's make a request using the Graph Explorer again. So we've got no failures, but we've got a warning. So this is coming back and saying you should be using the select parameter on this, because otherwise you're just getting all of the data. So let's just do display name, and I can run the query again, and it's passed through. We don't get the warning. But from a developer perspective, you get information as well. So we've got short links in here as well to provide extra information as to why you would want to do this. And again, good from a testing point of view to just highlight these and just say, hey, we should be, making sure that we're only getting the data that we actually need. In terms of the caching, so this is where you've got the ability to inspect requests. They're exactly the same that go over the wire, right after each other, so within a given time period. Default we set is like 5 seconds, but you can configure that. So if I just run this quickly again, we should get, there we go. So we get another warning. It says another request was made and was intercepted in 5 seconds. So consider using a cache as well to avoid calling the API too often. Again, really good way of making sure that your app is more efficient, that if you are making these same calls over and over again, try not to, try and cache that off and just get that from a local cache rather than keep going to the graph every single time. Okay, so that's some guidance, very quick to cover. The last one is security, and this is minimal permissions. So to enable minimal permissions, you actually do need to come into the settings file and enable this execution summary plugin, which essentially enables a recording mode in Proxy. We've already got this minimal permissions plugin that's already enabled, which works with this execution summary plugin. So we can set the proxy to record any request that comes in, and then it will go and tell us, hey, for this request or these collection of requests, this is the minimal scope that you need for this app to operate. So I've just changed those settings and then saved the file. If I go back to Proxy, I'm just going to close it. And again, let's go to Graph Explorer in here, and I'm just going to restart it. So what I'm going to do is press the R key. So you can see that recording mode has happened in there. I'm going to run this query. So that has passed through. I'm going to press the S key, which stops the recording in the proxy. So we can see that we get this output summary, which says, here we have the number of requests that came through, and it's retrieving minimal permissions for the me endpoint, so the request that I sent through Graph Explorer, and it returns the minimal permission that this is the lowest level permission that you need in your application to get that data out. So the other side of this is, let's see whether the request that I'm actually sending is using more scopes than it actually needs. So we can go back to the settings, and let's turn on the guidance plugin, save that. And let's restart the proxy again. Start the recording mode. There is actually an option, -- record, that will just automatically enable this as well. So now it's recording. Let's send this request through and stop recording. So now we have an extra section which says permissions on the token. So we can see that actually I've been using Graph Explorer and I've been going and doing all sorts of different things. Graph Explorer, for ease of use, kind of just keeps those scopes on the token. But from the proxy perspective, it's now saying, hang on, you didn't need all of these. You didn't need to send a token through with all these scopes to just get the information that you needed. You only needed user.read. So, maybe from an administrative perspective as well, where you get a request to say, this app needs to be created with all these different permissions, and you're thinking, do you need all these? Well, now the proxy is able to kind of help you discover what the application is actually doing and what permissions it needs and what permissions it's actually using as well, which is a great way of being able to just understand a bit more about the application that maybe you're reviewing, deciding on whether you're going to add that to your tenant or not. Okay, so let's close that one down, and that is the end of the demo. Got a couple more slides. So there's much more in the proxy than I've actually shown today. One of the things is mocking that we have in the proxy as well. So this is more of like a developer productivity tool almost, where you maybe just want to set up the proxy just to respond to your requests. You don't want to put data in lists or create profiles. You could just create mocked responses and let the proxy return those responses for you. So we do that for normal requests. So let's say you want to get user profile information, we get the proxy to return that. You can also do that for error responses as well. So I showed the graph error responses. We do have a generic error responses as well for using with any API. So you can have your own kind of custom mocked errors that you can send through and choose from. We support mocking the graph batch responses as well. So if you're using batching, and again, a good way of being efficient against the API, you can also mock those. And we've also just added an ability to generate mocks from real requests that your application makes as well. So there's a real good benefit that if you've already got an application and you want to build up some mocks, just run the proxy against the application, click around, and it will build up that file for you that then you can use in local development. We've got more guidance, developer guidance. So we've got OData paging guidance as well. So making sure that when you've got page data back from the graph, that you're actually working with that paging data in the right way. We've also got guidance that will detect whether you're using the Graph SDK or not. The Graph SDK has great benefits other than just sending the request, things like handling throttling by default as well. Like we saw with the Graph Explorer, it's handling the throttling behaviors, it's doing the retries for you. You don't have to write all that code in your application. You can let the SDK use that. And also with the middleware can then help you with rate limiting as well. With a client request ID header, so this is really useful if you need support from Microsoft. So there's the ability to add a ID into the header, which then if you have a support ticket open about a particular API request, you can quote that number, and then we can see that in the back end and see those actual requests that came through. And also if you're using beta endpoints as well, we have guidance in there to highlight those beta endpoints that you shouldn't really be using in production. So again, that visibility for making sure that your application is production ready. Maybe you're using a beta endpoint and now it's gone to V1. Things like that you can then handle and check in your application. And finally, we've got a new ability to simulate delays in traffic. So to actually, slow down the request. So you've got a slow network, or it's just slow to respond. So maybe, APIs are slow to respond sometimes. How does your application deal with that? So the ability to inject that behavior as well. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the latest release is 0.12.1. We have short links available, so aka.ms/m365/proxy. So we have the download short link, we have the doc short link, we have samples as well for the presets. So the graph preset that I showed, we have a whole gallery of presets, things that are graph-based, SharePoint-based, also being used with any API as well. We've got some examples in there for OpenAI API as well to handle rate limiting, which might be of use. And we've just announced this, so we do have a release announcement on the Microsoft 365 dev blogs as well, which is worth checking out. So fortunately, I only got 5 minutes, but thank you for listening. I think we hopefully have some questions, but if not, then.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Gary, for a great presentation and a great demo. So we'll just get into the questions and answers part now. So should you wish to ask a question, please feel free to type it into the questions box now. So there's a couple of questions that come in here in the questions box, Gary, and the first one I can see here is someone wants to know, how does the proxy handle issues like network latency or timeouts when making API requests?
So latency was the one that I just mentioned at the very end. So we have, show you this. We have this latency plugin that's here. It's disabled by default, but the configuration, if I go down to the bottom, we can see that there's the minimum and maximum milliseconds delay that we'll inject into those requests. You can just turn on that plugin for the proxy to inject that behavior. So we don't actually do timeouts at the moment, but that's something that we can definitely explore. We're very, very open to feedback. We are on GitHub. We are building this in the open. So if you do have a feature request, please pop along to the issues list, put that in there, and we'll definitely look to add that in. At the moment, we're releasing a new version every month, and we have done since December. So you know, we're always on the lookout for new ideas, and anything that is useful for you as developers and testers, we definitely want to hear about that. So please, yeah, pop along. In terms of the extra information for the docs, let's pop into here into the wiki. So every plugin that we have is documented in the technical reference, so that will show you how to use it as well, and what it actually does. So if there's any further questions on that, then definitely check out the docs where there'll be a lot more information for you.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Gary. Just another question then here. Someone wants to know, can the proxy be used with non-Microsoft 365 cloud services, or is it specific to Microsoft services?
So all I covered today was very Microsoft 365 related. If we go into the wiki, we have a how-to guide. So we have, where is it? It's the non-Microsoft 365. There, simulate errors from non-Microsoft 365 APIs. So we've got an example in here for the OpenAI API for doing errors. But in terms of throttling and all those other kind of behaviors, we've got generic plugins that you can use with these non-Microsoft 365 APIs. So definitely you can use any API as long as it's coming over the network and it's a HTTP API. We can inspect that request and then return a relevant response. So mocking is exactly the same as well. If you want to do mocks with say like a third-party API that you've built or custom built API, then you can use that as well. So if we go back down into here, we've got very much the graph-based plugins, but we do have the generic kind of alternatives as well.
Brilliant. Thanks again, Gary. So there's just one more question then here, and someone wants to know, are there any costs associated with using the Microsoft 365 Developer Proxy, or is it freely available for developers?
Freely available. Yeah, freely available. There's no cost. to come in and using it. Like I say, it's a Microsoft built product. So we actually built this as part of a hackathon last year actually, and then released it to the public. Yeah, come along, download it, try it out. There's no cost whatsoever.
Brilliant. So that is all the questions that I can see here. So we might wrap up the Q&A session there, but just on behalf of the ESPC community, Garry, I want to extend a huge thank you to you for taking the time to carry out this webinar today. We really do appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for everyone for attending and for your questions. Absolutely fantastic. And I hope to see you on the repo, and feel free, reach out to me, ask questions, Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever you can find me. Happy to answer them further.
Lovely. So that is the end of today's webinar. You can find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource center. That is it for today, folks. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today. Take care, and we hope that you'll join us again soon. Bye for now.
Thank you.